Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of DevOps Diaries and welcome to 2025, the first episode that has been recorded in 2025, and I've got a special treat in store for this first episode of the year. I am joined by Paul Battisson. Paul, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Hey Jack, Happy New Year. Sorry, don't know why I was surprised there to be said hello to, but hello, Happy New Year. And yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Paul. Thank you for spending a bit of time with us and a bit of time with the listeners today. I'm really excited to talk to you. Paul, you have a 15-year career in Salesforce itself, across a range of roles and range of disciplines and projects and all manner of things. But I was wondering, to kick us off, throughout all that time and throughout all that experience, what do you think defines your career in Salesforce so far to this point?
That's a really good and interesting question. I think it would be the guy that says yes to things and figures them out as he goes. Like I sort of have, one of the things that I'm a big believer of is just saying yes and trying stuff. And you know, when I started, Salesforce had a lot of edges that you would fall over off and have problems with very quickly, but there was always ways around it. It might not be exactly what you wanted, and so yeah, I think I define my career as saying yes to things and then figuring out how to get them done, even if it was a bit of a challenge along the way.
Yeah, I think that's I would say that's a fairly universal experience for a lot of people that stumble into Salesforce. Would you not say?
Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of people in the Salesforce ecosystem, and there's so many that, like myself, have kind of stumbled into it accidentally and, didn't really mean to be doing Salesforce. I got into Salesforce by applying for a .NET job, and the company happened to be hiring .NET and Java developers to retrain them in Apex and in Salesforce, and that company was Financial Force. So, it was at the time when there were no Salesforce developers to hire, unless you ran, this teeny tiny area of the valley, you could get some. But other than that, it was still $1 billion company, but quite a small $1 billion company then, I think. So yeah, there's a lot of people that have just stumbled in, and especially when it was a much smaller platform, you had to kind of make a lot more up as you went along and say yes to things and try things out. And I think, one of the things I've always loved doing is, doing talks and things where it's like someone telling me you can't do something and then going, yes, you can. And
I'll prove you wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. I built a machine learning system with a colleague many years ago in Apex before Einstein or anything else was like even mooted. In fact, it was just as Lightning was coming out. So that's how long ago that was. And someone was like, no, that's a stupid idea. You can't do it. And it got me a Dreamforce talk, and you could do it. It's a terrible idea. Never do it in production, but you could do it.
Yeah. Do you think saying yes might be something of a lost art these days to people? Do you think the fear of failure gets in people's ways these days? From my experience, I speak to a lot of people, and they're almost a little bit afraid to say yes because the platform is now so big and is more challenging and arguably more complex too. Do you think people say yes less?
I think people feel they can say less yes, and I think it's because there are more people on there. So what I mean by that is there's just less freedom in roles because you're now in teams and there's now established practices. And one of the systems that was really one of the things that was done loads and loads, a million times, was people used to come up with custom messaging queues. So before platform events, people will come up with batch processing systems that would like run every 5 minutes and process a series of S-object records and in a messaging queue kind of style. That I have seen so many people write that and use it and do it, including myself and some, and also some very smart people have done it as well. And it was a really clever, weird, stupid idea at the time. And you could say yes to it, and it would allow you to do all these massive volumes. But now, if you went away and started doing stupid things like that, there'd be an architect somewhere going, no. Look at the well-architected website. There's all these clever ideas. And so I think that the reason people probably say yes less is because there's less there's less freedom to go away and innovate perhaps in the same way. I think you can produce innovative solutions still by combining the pieces that are out there, but I think there's far less blank canvas, shall we say.
Yeah, yeah. There's far less scope to just go and do and see what works, rather than, okay, these are some, you've kind of got, it's kind of like buying a Lego set, I guess, and you having the instructions, right? The instructions will make the thing that is you're intended to make, but that creativity's kind of got lost because there's a solution. I mean, I guess the counter argument to that is the instructions help you get the right result, but if you don't use the instructions, you might get a result that isn't any less beautiful or creativity or engaging.
It is definitely more it's definitely more that arty thing. And when I say that arty thing, I mean like it's a blank canvas. It's that creativity piece where you're sat there and it's like, okay, I could be coming up against this problem for the first time that other people haven't had to experience or think about or bash their head against. And nowadays, there's very few of those problems on the platform that someone somewhere hasn't thought about already or solved. Might not be documented very well, or might not be written up in many cases, but there's far fewer instances rather of situations where someone's like a novel solution that no one's ever thought of before and that no one's ever done. And I think that's only ever. I think it's a really good sign of maturity in the platform. But I do think that, it gives you less chance to kind of have someone ask you a question and you say, yes, I'm going to go away and build something crazy. It's more a case of, yes, I can do this, but I've got the pieces already to slot together, and there's a lot of predefined ways to do it.
Yeah, for sure. What's the biggest problem that you think you've solved on the Salesforce platform that was creative and ingenious, I guess, for its time, maybe, if we talk about the years experience you've got?
What's the biggest problem I've solved? This is a really interesting one because, weirdly enough, I think one of the things that I solved that I really loved solving was always little performance things that have, like, I'm going to say little bearing on actual users, but are really important to actual users. So, I had I posted this on LinkedIn literally today as well. There was an example where, like, I once worked on a setup where they were doing a single page app. This is when single page apps were, the real kind of rage for a sign up. And what they wanted to do was have a customer fill out all their details and press the submit button, and it create all their records and give them a user and integrate with a third party identity system. And it fell apart because all the kind of things were out of sync and the timing was slow, and it was like a sort of 15-second process to wait for it to come through, and that sucks for end users. And so it was sort of a simple thing we broke down into a multi-step process, still on a single page, so the user still felt like they weren't navigating around, and lowered that down. That was quite a cool one that was not really overly innovative. It was more just a case of, I enjoyed sitting down and breaking apart like how you've got to go around the routing for things. I worked on an organization where I took a large org and broke it apart into kind of domains using platform events, and helped them. It was an organization that had grown rapidly, and they'd had a mixture of partners they'd had a mixture of in-house development, they had a mixture of developers that weren't Salesforce developers just going and doing things, and it was all chugging and slow. And it was a really interesting project, just as kind of platform events were first really being a thing, to go in and say, great, what we're going to do is start saying these are the events and these are the handovers and doing that. The weirdest thing I've done is probably still the AI thing. That was one that, I mean, again, shouldn't ever really be used by anyone in production, but that was just cool to sit and break down and think about how because there was a lot of so my background is I got a degree in mathematics. That was a lot of like, how do I break down big maths problems into something that Apex can do, which was quite fun and interesting. You get to do a lot of cool things, but like I think I'd really struggle to find like one like this is a shining example thing, because often the things that you find interesting are like, I've done some formula fields that I think are really like kick ass. Like some of the greatest value I've delivered to a customer is either just a couple of formula fields that solve problems, or sometimes it's saying no to people as well.
Isn't that the beauty of it though? That something. I'm going to say so simple, like a formula field that probably annoy quite a few people who are just like, oh, formula fields aren't simple or what have you.
Yeah.
But those things that are inherently simple can have the biggest value sometimes, and it's quite interesting that we get onto that. You're the founder and CEO of Groundwork Apps, and your tagline is making Salesforce simple. Isn't that what Salesforce should be? Isn't that what CRM should be?
I think it's what Salesforce started out being. I don't necessarily believe that Salesforce is as simple now as it could be, is my honest view. And Salesforce is now a much bigger enterprise platform, and it should be simple. And that's why, if we're honest, you can sometimes see like it getting eaten away at the real low end with by the likes of HubSpot and others out there. And that's not a negative on Salesforce. Salesforce has grown up. It used to be the snappy upstart, and now it's the big behemoth. Like that happens to everyone. There was a time at which Microsoft was this small, tiny, publishing company, and not the kind of legacy big beast that we see. IBM was once a scrappy startup. It's the nature of how those things go. I think the thing that Salesforce still offers above any other platform is a lot of things that can be done without a lot of what I'm going to call deep technical knowledge. And one of the things that I was reviewing, reviewing a book for someone the other day, and they were just chatting to me about different things in this book. And I said to on the technical side, and I said to them, "Oh, well, they were talking about naming variables," and I was like, "This is really interesting, but you're missing this context." They were, "What do you mean?" And like they were talking about having the name. If you have a name of a variable, have like str or int in it, or some indicator of the variable's type, and they're like, "Well, you don't need to do that. That's like an anti-pattern." I was like, "Well, you don't need to do it because you're working in this language. But if you were like a VB or VBA programmer back when you're using the dim word for like defining a variable, it was really useful to know whether that was a string or an integer or a floating point or whatever it might be." Same like this person hadn't worked with a duck type language like Ruby or something like that. And so I think that Salesforce's real value is that you can do so many simple things without having to have a coding background, but also a deep technical background. And I've said before on other podcasts and talks and that Salesforce is becoming the Microsoft Access of like enterprise software now. It's the modern Microsoft Access, and that is both really good and really bad.
Yeah,
it's really, really good.
For those that don't know Microsoft Access, what do you mean by Microsoft Access?
So for those that aren't slowly worrying about going grey, Microsoft Access was a database tool. It's still part of the Office suite, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, it was a database tool in the Office suite. So you have Excel and Word and PowerPoint, and there was another one called Access where you could build these very small SQL databases, and you could use SQL on them, and you could build these databases up, and you could build little front ends on them, and you could program against it with a language called VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, that is still available and usable today in Excel and Word and PowerPoint and all these others. And there was this proliferation in the 90s and early noughties of apps built using VBA. And using Access because it gave you a database, it gave you the ability to program, you could host the database on a server and connect to it, you could synchronize things. It was really quite clever and cool, but more importantly, it could be done by anyone. Like, there's a lot of applications out there and a lot of IT managers. I think there was a period where I remember, and this is not a verifiable statistic, but I remember being told once that there was a period where 50% of IT managers were former accountants.
Wow.
And it was because they'd all got very comfortable using Excel because they were doing their number processing in Excel and got very comfortable with formulas and doing that, and then moved on to doing Access databases, and then suddenly became the IT guy because they were the only one who knew how to change anything. And
the accidental admin of its time.
Literally, yeah, the accidental admin of its time. And I think that, Salesforce is now filling that role of, there were hundreds of these access apps, or Lotus Notes for those in finance, who ever had to deal with that wonderful system. There were hundreds of these apps built that have been replaced over time by Salesforce and by other things. It was shadow IT back then, and it's really good that Salesforce has that, because it shows it's got that low barrier to entry. It's really easy to work with, and it is flexible and manageable. But equally, we've got to learn the lessons of the past by all going, actually, we should, there was no version control, no DevOps, no security management. None of that stuff really happened unless you had a very good person managing it.
Yeah. What's so that low technical barrier to entry, I guess, or you can do a lot of fancy stuff in Salesforce. Fancy being that's a pretty poor word for me to be using, but you can do a lot of fairly complex things in Salesforce without too much technical understanding or knowledge. Like, I might be a contentious question, but is that a help or a hindrance to the platform overall? And or I guess is that there's probably more context to that, because you've already mentioned things like the well-architected framework. It might be less of a hindrance now, but it could maybe have been a hindrance previously. I don't know.
I mean, the honest answer from my perspective, I think both. I think it's helpful because it means you can get up and running quickly. Like, you can do really good quick proof of concepts and prototypes faster than you could on anything else. And there was a company I worked with years ago who invested lots and lots of money. And when I say lots and lots, I mean millions, in setting up a way in which their teams could quickly go and build proof of concepts in Salesforce as teams on hackathons, and then hand them over to IT, where IT would go, great, we've got your sketch of how you want this to work. Now we'll go away and do the boring stuff of like sharing rules and permissions and making sure it is in this normal form, or follows the best practices for this. So I think it can be really, really helpful. I think the hindrance of it is that nowadays there is a lot of technical debt. Salesforce orgs in general have quite a lot of technical debt. They have quite a lot of. It's easy to get data into Salesforce. Doesn't mean it's any good. There's a lot of that around there. There are orgs I have seen in the past few years with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of duplicates and things, and it still happens. And that's really, really key to keep aware of in this ever-present AI push. Is that if you it's all well and good having AI do things, but if you're having AI do things on really terrible data, then you're going to get really terrible outputs from your AI. And so it is a really helpful thing, and it really is a great selling point of Salesforce. But you've just got to be aware of, when you're doing something bigger, that you apply the same rigorous processes. And it's the same with any platform or language or doing anything. It's the same if you're working in a coordinated effort anywhere. If you're a one-person solo admin, Salesforce is brilliant because you can work as a one-person solo admin in a small charity and get up and running and be working away, and it's fantastic. If you're a enterprise team of 35 developers across 6 time zones, you can still work with Salesforce using VCS, and it will work brilliantly for you, and you can apply proper rigorous processes there, and it will do everything in between. And that is therefore helpful, and a hindrance of just making sure that you are following the rules for what you need to do.
Yeah. Where does good process start for you? If you look at a project or client or whatever it is, where does good process start, and setting yourself up for success start?
For me, it starts with the very first conversation and making sure everyone's aligned. And there are always, there are always 3 parties involved. There's normally about 3 parties involved you have to think of. And one of them is the customer. And it's making sure that they actually know what they want. Because one of the reasons I'm not too worried about AI replacing my developer role in the future is because until customers write really good requirements, that isn't going to be a problem. But I've worked with customers before where they've come to me and they've asked for things. I've then gone back with questions, and I once was in an organization where there was an entire board meeting around just a question I'd asked around their kind of GDPR requirements, which they hadn't thought of, which was just around their data retention and things like that. And it required their board of directors to go away and think about it because they didn't know what they want. They just said, we want a GDPR process. And like, well, how do you want to send to people? What do you want to do? All of that sort of stuff. So number one is the user or customer know what they want. Number two is having, I forgot to turn reactions off. Number two is having honesty from yourself as to what you can do and what you're able to do, and what's right for you to do. So I have never worked with Salesforce CPQ. I will not ever say to someone, there's a CPQ project, great. Give it to me. CPQ and Omni Studio, perfect. I'm your man. Like, no.
Hey, what happened to yes and figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, but if I'm gonna say yes to it, I'm gonna be upfront with the client and say, look, I have never touched either of these two things before. I'm gonna learn about this on the way. I have to be open and honest about that.
Of course.
But that is a big part of that, and that's one of the things that a lot of partners fail to do properly, is to be open and honest about the level of experience, and you have to have that in there. And then the third part is from the sales team, whether that's Salesforce or your sales team, being honest about expectations as to timeliness, quality, delivery, and how that comes through. And if you do those things right up front, the rest of the project becomes easier. And when it comes to kind of project quality, project delivery, project governance, documentation, etc., 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 everything else, if everyone starts off on that clear same page of what they want and what they want, what they're able to do, and what the expectations are, everything else becomes easier. And that's to me the first key part of the process is, you know Matt Morris, I'm sure.
I do.
And Matt Morris famously will tell you that it's not his quote, but it's one that he likes to really kind of drive home, is that there's people, there's processes, and technology, and the technology is very, very clever and very, very good, and we've got that nailed. And you know what? Most people's business processes are exactly the same. You might want to believe that yours are special, but they're not. The hard part is always the people involved. And if you can get that down, everything else is going to become easier.
Yeah, so it's a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, is the people side of implementations and processes. Yes. I spent the best part of 6 years working with Salesforce teams to help transform their delivery processes and making what started as a somewhat small section of their Salesforce delivery simpler, the deployments. And the more that I got entrenched in the DevOps side of the conversation, the more I realized it was less about the technology that was being used, but how the people communicated about how work was passed on, and how their feature that they built in sandboxes actually got to production. And it wasn't, change sets are bad, right? I'm just going to call a spade a spade. Change sets are bad and they're difficult to work with. But the biggest challenge is how do these people actually communicate with each other, and how does everybody understand that they're on the same page? Is there a particular instance that comes to mind where you've seen a team really get that light bulb moment of, if we work in this way, we'll have more success, or we tried doing something the way that Paul suggested and we're seeing the benefits of?
So, I think one of them that comes to mind, and so I'm going to go back, a second, and say, so the change set's a bad thing, right?
Okay, yeah, we can reverse.
So I agree with you, but I also don't think they're as bad as they get a rap for. And what I mean by this is that, again, if you're a solo admin and you're wanting to get things from a sandbox to a production environment, change sets are a good way of bundling things up and pushing them across. And one of the things that I think is really good that teams like GearSet and a bunch of the other providers have done is really make DevOps and that process side of things much more person-centric and visual. And to go back to your point a second ago about it's not really about the technology in it. It's about the people's processes and culture around it, around particularly with DevOps and that deployment lifecycle. One of the things I hated for years was, before the likes of GearSet and things like that, and even still to this day, you still got a lot of developers that are like, well, why would you use insert name of tool here? Why would you not just go to GitHub and create a bunch of actions, or I can write a script because I'm a clever developer? And it's like, well, that's really, really useful for you if you are sat alone in your little world with your coding screen and nothing else. But like when you're interacting with other humans, yeah. So my wife is a human for a start, but she is also
Reassuring.
yeah, reassuringly to say. But she is a solution architect. She is not. She doesn't program. She is not a developer. And so, a visual comparison tool and a way of visually promoting things through stages is much, much easier for her. And I think that's what you've got to realize is that trying to explain to people, and this really hits on what you were saying, getting people to understand deployment processes and life cycles and pipelines. When you're sat there with like a Git diagram and you're talking about version control, it's just you enjoying nerding out. And I'm not saying you in particular, Jack, but developers, you nerding out. As soon as you can show them visually, like, look, it shows you the difference between this and this, and it helps you understand where you are in the pipeline and moves it through. That's when people get that spark and you can see them understand, I can see 1,000 changes in line. And I don't have to sit there and look through a wall of text like I want to kill myself. People are not, people don't necessarily want to consume XML normally. Again, developers maybe, but, a lot of people don't. And so, on the change set thing, I think, change sets are the worst way of deploying that is out there, but they are still much better than either try to manually copy it across or not have a way of saying this bundle of stuff is what I want to deploy now. And one of the, kind of leading on to the question you asked, and sorry to kind of like tangent a little bit on there,
of
but
course.
On the question you asked about, like, is there a thing where I could see that light bulb moment? I think one of the ones is with that company I said about where I helped them split it into domains. And one of the, there was a lot of feedback, a lot of pressure from business users who were like, there was a group of business users that when I came in there still had system admin access. And when I say business users, like head of sales, head of operations team would be like, I'm going to go in and add a field because I want to report on this field. And it's like, no, you aren't. You shouldn't be allowed to do that. And it was only after a couple of months when we kind of got to this, it was about the third or fourth release we've been doing, where we were doing these small incremental releases, and then suddenly things tipped, and they just noticed one morning that everything ran a bit quicker. And they noticed that they asked for a change, and that change got through really quickly, and there was no errors and no fuss about it. And they noticed their reporting was a bit quicker. And it was really this kind of like, oh, everything's now starting to run a bit better. And although we'd been, although all the hard work had really almost been done prior to that, and it then took another, 2 releases afterwards for them to kind of get it, it's that thing of, showing success was then when they started to see it. Because it's all well and good standing there and saying like, well, do you know what, you should really be using we're on DevOps Diaries. You should be using a DevOps process here because, that's the correct way of doing it. And I can lecture people until the cows come home about DevOps, as I'm sure you can. But until someone sees the success and the outcome from it, it's really just you kind of, talking and, saying, aren't I clever? And, isn't this wonderful? I had my uncle used to work, he used to be a program manager at a big organization. And he said that this organization went in 7-year cycles where they get someone in, like a new VP. The VP would decide, so VP number 1 comes in, we're going to outsource everything and we're going to go to an agile method. And that would happen over a 7-year period. And then the new VP would come in and say, we're going to lower cost by insourcing and going back to a waterfall method where we're going to have less errors. And so that would be a 7-year. And like a lot of things are just cyclical and people are just going to come in and show that they're doing it. But you've got to see the results from it to get people on board. And that's the big part. And that will be when people will stick with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things like with anything, like, do you fully trust it until you see some level of success? And I guess that's why case studies and customer stories are so important in any life cycle. Salesforce have a big thing about their customer success stories, whether it be Aston Martin here in the UK, or I'm clutching at straws for one of the big US companies that they've used recently. Oh, like Saks on Fifth Avenue for like all their AI stuff. It's not until you have a story and you can actually see. Like there's this whole thing about what do they call it, art of possible. Until you show somebody the art of possible, they're not really gonna buy into it.
I think a lot of it is transparency as well. Like one of the things, one organization I work with where we actually got them, got them using a very popular DevOps tool that you will know and love very well, Jack, because you work for them. Yeah, we got that tool embedded in their system and got them doing DevOps. And there was so much resistance to it at the start. Like, let me tell you, I was, pushing that boulder uphill. But the way that myself and the program manager who brought it in worked with it is we said, right, we are going to be the most open and the most honest and transparent about number of errors, about number of issues, about test problems, about everything. Any and every issue we're going to document and tell you about. And we just went in there with full transparency about changes in velocity and everything. And we were clear up front, like, we're going to see a dip and then we're going to see it massively improve. But it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better because there's a change cost, okay? And we went through that, and over about a 6 to 9 month period, the first couple of months, we were getting a lot of pressure of like, why is it going slower? Why are we paying you to slow us down, Paul? Why are we paying you to go slower, so we're paying you more? And, you kind of sat there and be like, well, it's not really like that. But, and at the end of it, though, kind of, because we've been very open, because we've been honest and transparent, it was then really easy for people to see these numbers changing. And you have to make people part of that journey and process. You can't, you don't enforce any of these things upon people. You bring them along for the ride. And so we involved the training team so that they could explain to people why there were differences in the way that releases were coming. We involved power users to explain to them what this meant for them going forward. We involved the Salesforce AE to say, look, you ain't getting any more stuff purchased for the next 6 months, so you can back off with all the wonderful demos you're going to do us, and all we'll still take the steak dinners if you want to do them, but we'll back off the demos. But we could really use your help on best practices and other companies coming in to talk to our executives as to around it. And as soon as you start to bring all that team together on it and bring everyone on the journey, when people are invested in it because they're part of it, they want it to succeed. When you're telling someone we're doing this because it's the best way and I'm telling you it's the best way, then, there's a certain proportion of people out there that are stubborn and will go, no, it's not. I believe different.
Yeah. Who in this customer, you mentioned the initial pushback before you went on this journey with them. Who did that pushback come from?
It came from...
What role did it come from? I don't need names.
No.
Mike. What roles?
It came from a variety of places. So the leadership and sponsorship of the project, all the way from the CTO down, were concerned about the impact it was going to have on delivery speed, because we were open and said it would impact delivery speed at the start. And they're like, well, are we better off? But you're buying into an unknown kind of technically unknown kind of performance improvement later on. The business analysts had never worked in that agile format before, where we were going to start doing iterations. They were very nervous about having people come back and question and iterate on things because they're a business analyst. They know what they're doing. Why would I question what they're asking for? There was feedback from some of the users because they were like, well, we're used to this cadence, and from the training team, we're used to this cadence. There was a lot of resistance in different sizes from all areas because it's a change that impacts everyone. The data and reporting team, they had an analytics team. They were pushing back because they were saying, is this going to interrupt our data feeds? Is this going to change our deployment timeline and patterns for our data coming through? What if we want to add some new fields or change this? We were looking at governance and permissions as well and what comes through there. There's a lot of stuff that changes. So everyone had some concerns, and I'd be a liar if I didn't say that, starting out on any project, if you don't have some concerns yourself that, it's not always going to go perfectly, then you're lying to yourself. So, but you sit down and you work through them and you get all those concerns out there, you log them. If you wish to, you can do, the exciting risk log thing and go through that. You can But a lot of it is just education with people about, okay, well, let's go through it. And if you're open and get that information from people early, it meant we could build bridges really quickly. So, taking the training team, for example, one of the things they liked about their old process was that, the business analyst would write the user stories on like the 1st of January, and they would be locked in on the 30th of January, and then the training team had until like the 30th of or 28th of February to just sit and read and digest them, and then they would have until kind of the end of March or end of April to sit and build the training for them, and it meant that they had a lot of time and could think through things. Same with like the documentation team or release notes team. When you're doing iterative, it was like, well, you're going to get it on the Monday. We're going to question it on the Tuesday. It will be updated on the Wednesday. Thursday, we're going to probably start building it. And then the following Wednesday, it's going to be ready and you'll get a demo. And then you're going to have to train someone the following Monday. And they were like, this is too quick. But getting them to understand, well, look, but it's not this, it's this. And we can adapt and inspect. And we're going to have you involved in a lot more of these releases earlier on. And by getting to understand their concerns, you then have a conversation with them. And it meant as soon as you knew you were going anywhere near something that would worry them, get involved with them, have that conversation and get them on board.
Yeah. What's the key to keeping? So you've mentioned the transparency and honesty about the process, which I absolutely love. Getting people's buy-in up front through just saying this is what's going to happen. This is what I predict would happen. It's not going to be great to begin with, but that's fine. This is the anticipated result. We've seen this with other customers or other companies. This is an outcome, but it will go first. That trust, transparency, and honesty up front. But in terms of like communication, as you kind of go through those changes, what you mentioned taking people on that journey with you. How do you do that successfully? Like, how do you make sure that they stay on the train with you and get to the destination?
You have to, I think it's understanding that you're, particularly as a consultant, you're in a very privileged position of kind of knowing where the answer and the outcome is going to be because you should have seen it before. Especially if, and I'm not about here in particular like an architecty role. If you're an architect on a project, you should have seen a lot of these outcomes already as a team member, at least, if not as an architect elsewhere. So where the train's going, where the lumps and bumps are going to be. If you're a really good architect, you'll probably see a bunch of the lumps and bumps coming as you're going down that road, and you'll be like, this is going to be an absolute nightmare for the next couple of weeks. So get on top of that. But it's understanding fundamentally that just because you know that, other people don't. And it's, it's like, and this is not meant to sound condescending or patronizing, but it's an example that pops into my head is, you and I were talking just before we started recording. You've got 2 young kids, right, Jack? And I am sure there are things that they worry about that you as a grown adult are just like, what? I've got a 3-year-old nephew, and the other day, me and my wife were out with him and my brother and sister-in-law, and he saw a picture that scared him of a clown, and he spent the next 15 to 20 minutes, I kid you not, to my wife going, we never have to see the clown again, do we, Auntie Amanda? It's scary and we don't have to. And it's one of those things that, like, as an adult, you're like, it's a picture of, it wasn't even a clown, if I'm honest. It was just a picture that you saw that you thought was a scary clown. Your kids will probably have things where they are worried about, like, something under the bed, something in the cupboard, like, they just don't, a firework, could be anything, right? And sometimes you have to remember that they don't have the same information you have. They've not gone through the same things you have. And so the right thing to do is to stop and to say to them, okay, and explain it through them and bring them on that. And that's taking them on that journey with you. And it's the same with customers and users. And this is what I'm not being patronizing, or really trying not to be patronizing here, saying that they're like children. But what I mean is it's that they don't have that same experience or level of information as you do going through it. So you've got to, when someone asks you a question, it's not that they're trying to challenge you. They're just trying to get the information. And so be really open. Say to people, if you've got a question, ask me. There is no stupid questions. I used to make sure that every week I would have meetings, whether formal or informal, with just all of those people that I've said were feeding back concerns and information. Even if it's just a quick sort of at the end of another call, I try and grab them for 10 minutes to say, listen, just after that, that status call we're having there, just want to check everything seemed okay from your side and your team. Any worries? I know you're worried about this thing, and we've just kind of touched on that, and yada. And if you don't do it, get someone you trust to do it, so that because different people feel trust with different people as well. That's also another thing: is be aware that you can't be all things to all people. Like I'd like to think I'm not a horrible, onerous person that people don't like to work with, but I can be, I'm sure. And second of all, like there's different people just respond to different people differently. Like I'm not going to be everyone's favorite. The program manager who I was working with, other people preferred talking to her about stuff than me, and that is completely fine because she and I could have a conversation. We were on the same page, and as long as she got that message across and got it reassured or fed back to me, this is the worry, and vice versa, then we're good. But you've got to have that team, but that's how you bring people along, is constantly checking and just being open. They're not trying to challenge you; they're trying to get an answer.
Yeah, and that's the human element of everything that we do. I think also being able to take a step back yourself, and you mentioned about this team preferring to talk to your project manager colleague. It's just like you've also have a responsibility to abstract your own feelings about that away to get the best result too, right? It's just like, okay, like they want to talk to that other person, and understanding that is because of the human element of things, of which everything is intrinsically linked, whether it be these interpersonal relationships and connections throughout a conversation or the AI conversation. Everything is linked back to human responses and human emotions and human feelings.
I think a lot of adults forget. Too many of us as adults have gone far too long without putting ourselves out of our comfort zone in certain areas. So and this is one of those things that I think consulting is pretty good at, because as a consultant, you go into an organization you've never been into, you're meeting a bunch of people you've never spoken to, and I have turned up at offices so many times where I'm told I'm meeting Jack. Ask for Jack when you get to the reception desk, and you don't know if it's going to be Salesforce tower size office block where there's 10,000 people there, or like if you ever could just be some back office somewhere in like Staines or something like that. What I mean? You don't know where it's going to be, what it's going to be like, and putting yourself in that discomfort means that you kind of are in an office. And so it's a really stupid but kind of hopefully useful example here. When you're in the office for a first time as a consultant, one of the things you have to ask is, excuse me, where are the toilets?
Right. And pretty essential information, right?
Very essential information. So where the bathroom is, and where the kitchen is to get a cup of coffee. And I'm a grown man. I don't want to have to be chaperoned to the toilet and back. I want to be able to go when I need to go. But asking that is not like it's a silly question to ask. Excuse me, where's the toilet? I
feel like a 6-year-old again.
You do, yeah. And that's the point, though, is that because people forget what that discomfort is like, and so when people are asking you these questions, it's not to challenge you, it's not to be difficult in most circumstances. It's because they don't know, and it's very hard for them to come and ask you that. And if you remember what your first Salesforce project was like, or your first whatever project was like, remember the fear you had when someone said to you, listen, we're wanting to do it. Can Salesforce do that out of the box? And is that included in our price? And the fear of you going, I don't know. That's scary. That's what these people are going through constantly by you saying, we're going to change your world. It's going to be wonderful. Right. You've got to remember that. And, it's a really, as you said, it's a human thing to go through, but I think people forget what it's like to go through that change when they're the ones delivering it normally.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And that understanding is, I think I have an opinion, but do you think we take that for granted because we see all these changes and because it is our day in, day out that we just completely forget that? And this project that you're doing, or you've been brought into an organization to do something, whether you're a consultant or a new architect to implement something like CPQ, we forget that because we do it all the time and we're used to it. It becomes overlooked as part of the strategy of us going in somewhere and transforming the way that they work.
I think there's a large part of it that's that. I completely agree with all of what you just said there as a big reason for it. I think the other reason sometimes is the change ain't happening to us.
Right. Yeah.
If
yeah.
If you are so as a kind of interesting example, like most times you go into an organization doing Service Cloud, one of the things you're doing is making people more efficient, so they can answer, so that more cases can be answered quickly, or less time is spent answering each case. Now, one of the other things you're often doing is you're trying to make it so there are less cases and questions overall. Now, typical business management head would then say, well, if we have 1,000 cases a day at the moment and they're being answered by 20 people, and we lower that number from, let's say, 100 cases by 20 people, and we lower that number to 50 cases a day, and we get those cases being largely answered by self-service, and then we add a bot in, or we add an agent, or whatever it is, we're not going to need as many people. And when you're sat there doing Salesforce and just implementing your bots and your agents and your knowledge bases and all that, it's very easy to kind of just see it as a technical problem where, look, isn't it really good that I got that question answered before they actually got to talk to someone? But if you're sat there on the agent side, you're thinking, great, am I going to have a job after this? Am I going to, and it's all well and good saying, well, great, just retrain and become a Salesforce professional. That's to retrain and do that. But humans aren't just things you can pop in and out of roles and jobs like that. These people have got jobs and lives and families and things like that, and that's what you've got to be aware of, is that you aren't just changing things in their day-to-day job and life and it's not impacting you. Once you've delivered your work and it's successful, you toddle off to your next one. Like, that's what you've got to remember, is it's not just that you're so used to seeing it, it's that it doesn't impact you. You're not going to be made redundant if they then sit there and say, actually, do you know what? That guy from Salesforce did such a kick-ass job that we no longer need half of our agents. What you need to do is then help them do Sales Cloud well enough that they've got twice the number of opportunities coming in, so that so that the agents are kept busy by having twice as many cases overall. But that's all the sort of stuff that I think people just forget.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody that is an agent in a role that is potentially going to be, I don't want to say replaced, but become less busy because of the impact of agents? What would you say to those people? You said there, it's all well and good telling them to retrain and go and become a Salesforce admin or consultant or what have you. The truth is, things are a little bit more difficult than that. What would you say to those people that might be feeling that? And I don't know if there is anybody like that listening to this podcast. I'd say it's more the technical people that are actually implementing the agents. But if for those people that are implementing the agents, because the inevitable questions will come. At some point, an agent is going to say to somebody implementing Agentforce, what the hell am I supposed to do now? What's your answer to them?
Yeah, my answer is that, and this is actually what I'd say I try and lay this like as part of my Service Cloud plans with people when I'm doing it. So my biggest thing to say to people is that I'm not, and I say this to the executives, is that you should not be lowering your agent headcount. What you should be doing, because if we implement everything else correct, so you got knowledge articles so people can get an answer, and then you've got your bot, and then you've got your chat, and then finally someone gets to talk to a human. I actually have been trying to talk to someone at Amazon today for an hour and a half to fix a problem where like their driver damaged part of my property before Christmas, and I cannot get through, and it's infuriating. And I finally got to talk to someone, and I got passed around and passed around and passed around, and it was just nightmarish. But the one person at the end who I spoke to was very helpful and was able to say, look, and they were really upfront with me, like, I can't help you, but I can try and connect you with someone who can, because this is a niche area and a niche problem and all these things, and we can go through it. And they provided me with a good level of customer service. And so what I tell people is, if someone has not been able to find a solution on self-service, if they've not been able to get an answer from a bot or an agent, if they've not been able to use chat to it, or if they've had to call you up about it, they're gonna be annoyed. Number one,
right?
And number two, they're either annoyed or they've got a problem that is way out of the ordinary, or both. And that is where a human can come on and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you've had that. I want to help you. Let's go through this together. And they can provide an exceptional level of service. And that is always what I say to both the top level and the bottom level. And excuse me for the terminology there, but the agents up to the executives is, you want your agents there to look after your customers and give them the best service possible. They should be focusing on your gold and platinum tier accounts, or whatever you want to call it like that, to really give the best answer that they can. You shouldn't be lowering headcount. And if you're an agent, you should be making sure that you are getting rid of all of the wheat and the chaff that you don't want to deal with. Come up with those knowledge articles, help on that, so that when someone calls in, you can make them go, I'm so glad I called in and spoke to Jane at ABC Inc. and they solved my problem, and I've now got a much better view of the organization than if it's just people trying to get off the phone quickly.
Yeah. It's so interesting, and I'm glad I asked you about it, because it comes back, and we've spoken about it in the episode quite a bit already, but when it all comes back to the humans, what happens when technology fails? You want to speak to a human. You want to come back to that. So it's just such an interesting circular thing, as when we think about it, technology makes our lives easier, but actually, what do we want to solve our problems? But when technology fails us, is another human, and
it's just, and a lot of it's just feeling understood. I'll be very honest, if there's anyone from Amazon listening right now, whether you or not you pay to sort out my broken wall or not, I just want someone to help me figure out how I get it resolved properly, because at the moment I'm just up against it. I just want to feel understood and heard. Everyone does. I had a customer earlier on for my ISV app who's having a small issue, and it is a small issue. It took me 5 minutes to solve. Took me 30 minutes on the phone call with them, just saying, look, I'm sorry about it. And it wasn't even my fault. It was something they'd done. But it took me 30 minutes just letting them say, this shouldn't be that hard. I'm like, yeah, it shouldn't be that hard. Please go and have a word with Meta about their setup. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a pain in the ass. I agree with you. It's terrible. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we fixed it. And then they were happy. And that's all it is sometimes. It's just allowing people to be heard, allowing people to understand what they need, because humans want to talk to humans. If we learn anything from the pandemic, that's what we all learn, is we all need that connection.
Right. Absolutely. Paul, I've learned so much from you from this conversation and this episode, and I hope that the listeners have too, because I think what we talked about today is really important. Is there any kind of last words of wisdom for anybody on their Salesforce career journey, where they are, or anybody stepping into consulting or any of those things? What kind of advice would you give to those people, or anybody exploring new technologies, or any last comments or thoughts about where we are right now and where we're going, and how they can be successful?
Yeah, I think the thing that obviously there's a lot of concern out there in the marketplace in the world right now for am I going to have a job? Am I going to be able to do these things? Am I going to get replaced, or whatever it might be? And just the biggest bit of advice I can give to people, on top of what we've already discussed, is consistency and detail. And it's a really boring bit of advice, I'm afraid. I'd love to just say go and learn this one thing. I mean, the YouTube video will be, learn this one thing to double your career in 2025, and that one thing is just going to be boringly detailed and consistent. At the end of every time you do something and you learn something, and you come across something a little bit weird, write it down. Anytime you go and make changes or you're working something out, write it down. When you come against a problem, just stop, be boring, and go, okay, Let's eliminate variable 1. Let's eliminate variable 2. Let's eliminate variable 3. Write down what you've changed and undo those changes back so you can really isolate the problem. And doing that will put you ahead of 95% of other people, because consistent and detail-oriented is what will get you there. The one thing that I have done, ironically, I'm going to say consistently, in my career that's kind of got me through a bunch of things is just sitting down and when people are kind of panicking or worrying about things, is being like, okay, let's just stop and go through it bit by bit and methodically, and you'll get an answer. It might not be the answer you want, but you'll get an answer, and that's key. So my biggest bit of advice on top of that is, if you really want to, and this is for any job anywhere, be consistent, be methodical, be detail oriented, and keep your bar really high. If you do that every day, you'll never have to worry.
Paul, thank you so much. Where can people find you and connect with you after the episode?
I'm P. Battisson pretty much everywhere, because I'm nice and consistent, if nothing else. If they want to learn more about Groundwork Apps and our apps, they can come to groundworkapps.com. If they want to learn more about what I do through CloudBytes TV, where we have a podcast and a lot of videos and book reviews and things like that, and some live streams, they can go to CloudBytes, BITES TV on YouTube and find me there.
Cool. Paul, thank you so much. Happy New Year to you. Thank you for the conversation, and I look forward to hopefully seeing a lot more of you in 2025.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jack. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers.